Thanks for joining my channel again. I'm grateful you chose to spend a little time here. Want to give a hello to my brother Bill and possibly his wife Esther, as I'm believing there's, at this point anyway, there's a real good chance, Bill, that you're the only one that's watching the channel. So thank you. Appreciate that. But so we're going to get going. This is going to be a follow-up to last week's installment on Isaiah 53. That was really, really tough. And my hope and belief in God willing, the next 2 weeks, we're going to be focusing on 2 practical exercises on how to actually put into practice the crushing and grieving that Jesus modeled to us and did for us in Isaiah 53. But today, this is just going to be a follow-up on Isaiah 53, and I'm just entitling this Suffering, Service, and Self-Sacrifice. In a sense, this is a general or kind of an umbrella principle of how to put into practice the crushing and grieving that God has in mind for us Christian husbands who are either trying to improve or restore our marriages. And so basically, today's talk is just basically 2 quotes and then some verses from the Bible. But the 2 quotes are coming from a gentleman from Romania. His name is Dr. Tson, Tson, and he wrote a wonderful book entitled Suffering, Martyrdom, and Rewards in Heaven. Fantastic book, and I believe, not to get political here, but the way our country is heading, this is going to be a priceless book in regards to keeping Christians faithful during these politically hard times. But what Dr. Tson talks about in regards to suffering, service, and actually martyrdom can be applied to marriage. And so the first quote I want to look at is this. The first duty of the disciple is, therefore, to discover the will of his master and to do it with joy and passion. Now, Dr. Tson is not telling us to do anything that Jesus didn't model for us. I believe it's Hebrews said, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He knew his Father's will. He chose to do it with joy and passion. The joy, because I don't think anyone would have seen joy in Jesus, but since the Bible says he had joy, Jesus had joy. The passion is easy to see because he obeyed, he followed through and gave his life for us, and as Ephesians 5 says, gave his life for his wife. In the same way now, Jesus is calling us to do in Ephesians 5. God will give you and I a joy and a passion as we follow through with a desire to be obedient to God with Isaiah 53. And this is a side note. What I'm finding is in so many areas in my life right now is when it comes time to doing something that's difficult, possibly I don't initially emotionally want to do, or something I know that don't have the ability to do, I'm finding that there's a sense of fear and anxiety that's taking place before the actual activity has to take place. And what I'm finding is to choose, make a volitional choice a matter of my will to say, Jesus, in your power, I will do this. I want to do this. This is not some cute little positive affirmation thing. It's choosing to obey and setting aside my negative or unhelpful emotion. And so in the context of reality, who wants to suffer, serve, and, have a life of self-sacrifice? That's not, again, as we talked about earlier, that's not what all of us signed up for when we said I do. But it is nonetheless what God is calling us to do. For the most part, God is not calling any of us to give our physical life for our wife. That's just not. Now, I can see, like in Dr. Tson's case, he lives in communist Romania, or he did, and it could have been where he was required to give his life for his wife to possibly protect her or something else. But for most of us, it's not going to be like that. What it will look like is daily acts of kindness, overlooking wrongs, sacrificing our time, possibly our money, and letting go of one of the, like we looked at earlier, one of the byproducts of the Genesis 3 curse, our harshness, our being cruel, mean, overbearing, overdemanding, letting that go. That literally could be, for some of us, an act of self-sacrifice. And so these are some general principles of what it will look like to suffer, serve, and self-sacrifice for our wife. What I want to do next then is, there are so many different verses, and I'm going to make a general principle here. Whenever you see a verse in the Bible, I'm going to throw some of them out that God's been using in my life, but whenever you see a verse or verses in the Bible that says, love this way, that when we do that in Jesus' power, that can be an act of suffering, service, or self-sacrifice. Okay? We're going to look at a few of them. I'm just going to throw out a few verses here. I'm not going to give a big commentary on them. I'm just going to let God do and Holy Spirit do what they want to do with these verses. But this is Luke 6:27 to 36. I'm not going to read all those verses. It's way too many. But here's just a snippet of this. But to you who are willing to hear, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. For he is kind to those who are unthankful and wicked. You must be compassionate, just as your Father in heaven is compassionate. That word compassionate can also be kind. For whatever reason, kindness works better than compassionate for me. It just works better when I'm thinking about Lori. I hope none of you are literal enemies with your wife or ex-wife. I've done enough counseling, marriage counseling sessions to know that this does happen. I hope it's not true. At the same time, if that's where you're at, Jesus says to love your enemies. He says, be kind to those who are unthankful. And we can't do this. This is what I mean by an act of suffering, service, or self-sacrifice. I do not have the ability to do this in and of myself. But since God and Jesus have called us to do it, one, they never tell us to do anything that they first haven't done themselves. Look at what Jesus went through for us. Okay? Loving his enemies, Romans 5:8. But God demonstrated his love towards us. And in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That verse literally is talking about when we were enemies to God, he died for us. So God and Jesus never tell us to do anything that they first haven't done themselves. And then two, if he tells us to do it, he will do it through us. Why? Because the majority of things that God tells us to do, that Jesus tells us to do, we can't do. The Christian life is, I can't, you never said I could, you can, you always said you would. It's Galatians 2:20. I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and delivered himself up for me. He does the work. Anything he tells us to do, he always does it through us. And we're definitely going to need that when it comes to practically living out Isaiah 53. John 13:1 through 5. This is where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. I'm not going to read the whole verse. You can check it out yourself. John 13:1 through 5. But after reading this, it seemed like for me, God was saying, and it was a huge shift for me. Because of that, my number one ministry now is loving and serving Lori and Sammy. That's my number one ministry. I'm hoping, I'm in the process of getting another ministry going. I'm believing it's either going to be entitled No Marriages in Heaven or Hope for Husbands. Hope for Husbands. I'm still asking God what he wants to do there. But because of Jesus wrapping that towel around his feet and washing the disciples' feet, Lori and Sammy are now my number one ministry. That doesn't mean I don't do other things, but I make a priority. God is helping me make a priority of shifting my schedule, making sure that I make life easier and simpler for both Lori and Sammy, just because of that passion. That can be for you an act of suffering, service, or self-sacrifice. I think it was initially. Now it's just an act of joy. We all know these. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7. Love is patient. It's kind. It's not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. I'm not going to read the whole verses, but 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7. Those are easy to read. They are really hard to put into practice. They are very, very difficult. Not keeping records of wrongs or holding resentments. When you're in a difficult marriage, resentments are easy to hang on to. Okay? So in order to let some of those go, that could be an act of suffering, service, and self-sacrifice. Okay? Never gives up. 1 Corinthians 13. Love never gives up. Have you given up? It doesn't matter what she does. Have you given up? To hang on and keep going and being faithful even when she's been unfaithful. That is an act of suffering, service, and self-sacrifice. Love is always hopeful. Have you lost hope? I understand. Before I got a divorce and after Lori and I got divorced, I had lost all hope. I wanted to commit suicide. I totally understand that. But asking God to give us the ability to suffer, serve, and self-sacrifice for our wife in the context of dare to hope. That's why it's there. Dare to hope, dare to hope, dare to hope. That can be an act of self-sacrifice. Matthew 23:11. The more lowly your service to others, the greater you are. To be greatest, be a servant. Matthew 23:11. When our marriages aren't going well, when it seems like we're doing our best and it seems like she's doing her worst, to jump in and serve, that's an act of suffering, service, and self-sacrifice. You want to be greatest, be the least. Okay, Luke 14:26. This one's going to be a little bit weird, but I think it's really important. In the context of doing what Dr. Tson had said, our first duty is to biblically hate our wife. Luke 14:26. Our first duty is to biblically hate our wife and love Jesus more than her. If you're stuck in marital idolatry, that's what this book was about, and I think I may rewrite it, but just love her, not worship her, just love her. If you're stuck in marital idolatry and you worship the ground she walks on, and you say yes to her when you should have said no, and you say no to God when you should have said yes, you're stuck in marital idolatry. And so one of the first acts of biblical love for our wife is to biblically hate her. And the primary evidence that we love Jesus more than her is obedience. It's obedience. He who has my command, John 14:21, he who has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And so if I'm obeying her instead of him, I'm way out of whack. And here it is, it's never going to work. It never, uh, bringing up my past counseling role, the secular world would call that codependence. I'm, from a biblical perspective, going to call that idolatry. Okay. From a biblical perspective, that's idolatry. From a non-Christian perspective, if that helps you, that's codependence. And say, I'm only happy if she's happy. So I'm going to say no to God and say yes to her. There's going to be huge problems with that. And so in the context of suffering, service, and self-sacrifice, the first one in the context of find out God's will, biblically hate your wife and biblically love Jesus. So here's the next quote. Dr. Tson said, God entered history by sending his incarnate son as a suffering slave who would end his own earthly life, enduring torture and martyrdom. In this event, God revealed to us that suffering and service are his specific methods of tackling the problems of rebellion, of evil, and of the sin of mankind. Self-sacrifice is the only method consistent with his own nature. Let me say it again. Self-sacrifice is the only method consistent with his own nature. That's why Isaiah 53 is so important. I do not believe that I know I have never seen this anywhere else. I've never heard anyone talk about it, etc. But it is the specific answer, as we looked at earlier, to Ephesians 5, of giving our lives, of loving our wife in the same way Jesus gave his life for the church. It's consistent with what he always does. He gave his life for us, and now he's calling us to give our life for our wife. Not physically, but as we just looked at earlier. Okay. I'm going to read this because it's pretty long and I want to get it right. This next statement is going to come across as hard and unloving, but the biblical reality is the byproducts of the curse on our wives and ourselves is full of sin, just like Tson talked about. This sin is going to result in harshness and anger on our part and rebellion and disrespect on hers. Keeping this in mind, as we're attempting to apply what Dr. Tson is suggesting here, we'll want to ask God to give us the ability to tackle the problems of rebellion, of evil, and sin that is present in our wives. And again, I'm going to go back to Genesis 3 and Ephesians 5, 26 and 27. A way that you and I can either improve or restore our marriages is through suffering, service, and self-sacrifice. Okay? Since this is the only method consistent with his own nature, we'll want to ask God to give us the ability to follow Jesus' example and directive from Luke 14:26 and Ephesians 5, I want to say 25 and 26, to biblically hate her and love Jesus more and suffer, service, and show acts of kindness and self-sacrifice. So, because this is one of the major mistakes I made before our divorce and even during the first, 3 or 4 years of our divorce. Ephesians 5 then is not about us wearing the pants in the family. demanding respect from our wife. It will be more about imitating Jesus' example and give our life for our wife. Whenever in doubt, be humble. I'll throw it again. Whenever in doubt, be humble. Jesus' disciples were, arguing about who was the greatest. They weren't going to wash anybody's feet. So the greatest, Jesus, humbled himself, tied a towel around his waist, and washed his disciples' feet. The potential rebellions, manipulations, and disrespect, along with other spiritual blemishes, this is from Ephesians 5, can all be addressed as we imitate Jesus by surrendering and humbly following through in his power with God's good plan to crush and grieve us as we suffer, serve, and self-sacrifice for our wife. Okay, I know this isn't an easy one. We're going to be even more specific, God willing, the next two installments. And I'm going to read this so I get it right. We'll want to ask God to give us a heart that is more concerned about her growth than we are about what it's costing us. That's easy to say or read. It's really hard, impossible to do. Again, another act of suffering, service, and self-sacrifice. We'll want to ask God to give us a heart that is more concerned about her growth than we are about what it's costing us. And then I want to finish up with this, 1 Thessalonians 5:24. He who calls you is faithful, who also will do it. That's from the New King James Version. He who calls you is faithful. If God tells you to do something, which I believe that's what we're looking at in these talks, he will do it. You're not alone. Dare to hope, dare to hope, dare to hope. You're not alone. Okay? Thanks for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you, Bill, and hopefully others next week. Thanks.